Putin masters the details. He's going to have all the facts, all the details at his, in his head. Trump, by most accounts, doesn't like lengthy briefings. He's not going to be up on the details. And I think that positions Putin to play Trump. And my concern is that Trump, not knowing some of the background of these issues, some of the complexities, might agree to things that really would be problematic for the Ukrainian side. So I am concerned in that sense.
Stephen, first of all, what would you say about what has changed this week, if indeed anything has, on the path to peace for Ukraine?
Well, I think that's the big question. After the meeting that Stephen Witkoff had with Putin, President Trump said great progress had been made. But if you look on the battlefield, the Russians continue to prosecute the war on the ground. Russian rockets and drones continue to strike Ukrainian cities. And if you look over the past week, when the Russians talk about their conditions for ending the war, it's their maximalist war aims, which would amount to Ukraine's capitulation. So I think that's the question I have now is what was the great progress that now has led apparently to this agreement to a meeting between Putin and Trump?
Yeah. And the meeting itself is an intriguing concept, isn't it? Because we have to consider whose interests will be represented at that meeting if it goes ahead.
Well, I think to start, the very fact of the meeting is going to be a victory for Putin, because there's been this unstated agreement among Western leaders now going back to early 2022 to boycott meetings with Putin. And for Putin, this is going to be a big chip in the armor of exclusion to him. So he's looking forward to this. Just the fact of the meeting, I think he will see as a win. And then there's the second question, which is what do they discuss and how far do they go on the question of the Russia-Ukraine war? And my concern here is Putin masters the details. He's going to have all the facts, all the details at his, in his head. Trump, by most accounts, doesn't like lengthy briefings. He's not going to be up on the details. And I think that positions Putin to play Trump. And my concern is that Trump, not knowing some of the background of these issues, some of the complexities, might agree to things that really would be problematic for the Ukrainian side. So I am concerned in that sense.
There is also the question of the sidelining or the lack of involvement of anyone else, in fact. So not just President Zelensky, who it sounds as though it's not a prerequisite that he's invited, but then also no European nations be represented or NATO allies be represented there. I'm just wondering, Stephen, if it's the sort of thing that, in fact, an ambassador should be sitting in the room so as to have an alternative voice in there as well. That doesn't seem likely at this point either, though.
Well, I assume that there will be people with Mr. Trump when he does meet with Putin. But there is this question about the role for Zelensky, because the White House, said on Wednesday that the idea was there would be a bilateral meeting between Trump and Putin, and then there would likely be a trilateral meeting that Zelensky would join. However, the Kremlin is saying, well, yes, the Americans raised that idea, but we didn't agree to it. It really wasn't discussed. And so it looks like the Russians are pouring cold water on this idea of a three-way meeting. And I think there's also the question of the Europeans, because it seems to me that the approach of the Trump administration envisages a fairly substantial role for Europe in the implementation of any kind of a settlement. And one of my old bosses, George Shultz, the Secretary of State in the Reagan years, used to say, if you want people in on the landing, you usually have to have them in on the takeoff. And so I do worry that this can't be just an arrangement between the American and Russian presidents. Zelensky has to be involved. I don't think the Ukrainians would accept something negotiated over their heads. And also, given the role that the White House hopes that the Europeans will play, the Europeans have to be involved at an early stage as well.
With that in mind, is the meeting a good idea?
Again, we don't exactly know what this great progress is. If there's some there. So I'm reluctant to say it's a bad idea, but it does make me nervous, not knowing whether there was some commitment made by the Russian side that would actually move to advance a process towards a real ceasefire and a real settlement.
I wonder as well, I was speaking to one of our correspondents yesterday, who said that the previous meeting between Trump and Putin, which was in Helsinki a number of years ago, she was there. This is Catherine Philp, the World Affairs editor of the Times. And she was remembering that meeting, and she described President Trump supplicating himself physically to Putin. She said you could see it. He was kind of in submission to Putin's demands. And she said, should this meeting go ahead, I hope he takes a drastically different approach to that one. Do you suspect he would, Stephen? Are these the same men, the same characters as they were all those years ago in Helsinki?
No, I share her concern. I think that the press conference that was given in Helsinki in 2018 was one of the most embarrassing episodes, one of the most embarrassing performances by an American president overseas, where Mr. Trump sided with Putin over the assessments of his own intelligence community. A former colleague of mine when I was at Brookings, and a friend, Fiona Hill, at the time was Mr. Trump's senior advisor on Russia. And she said it was so bad. She was in the audience. She was actually at one point considering faking a medical emergency to bring it to a halt. So I do hope that, and again, I never dealt with Mr. Trump personally. But does somebody tell him, what happened in 2018 made you look weak? It made Putin look like the victory in that appearance. And you can't afford that kind of appearance if you want to maintain a strong image.
I think that's interesting as a sort of sales pitch. I think often, and forgive me if I'm being naive here, but often we refer to guardrails, don't we, in these sorts of meetings, the sorts of things that might be instilled in those taking part, in this case President Trump, to not breach, to try to focus on an outcome. How would you sell what other guardrails should be in place of any meeting? How would you sell those to President Trump?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I mean, I worked at the White House for President Clinton. And when he would meet with Yeltsin at the time, Russia was conducting a horrible military campaign against Chechnya. And we, the U.S., agreed that Chechnya did not have a right to succeed from Russia. But we are telling the Russians, you need to observe basic human rights principles. And so we tell the president, you have to raise Chechnya. And his reaction is, well, gee, if I raise Chechnya, I'm just going to get 10 minutes of defensive posturing from Yeltsin. And we said, well, Mr. President, yes, but you have to raise it so that at the press briefing afterwards, Mike McCurry, your spokesman, say, yes, we raised it. And that's the kind of advice that you give to the president, and smart presidents take it. I'm not sure how you approach somebody like Trump, who really, I think, has this self-image that, his gut is the way to go.
Yeah, and it can all change in a heartbeat, can't it? So it can be sort of best laid plans, but actually when he starts speaking, he's hostage to fortune.
Well, this has been the shift. I mean, we've seen him really all over the map over the last 6 months on Russia, going from, I think, being inclined to engage Putin. We saw, I think, early on that he's not a particular fan of Zelensky, but then gradually becoming more and more frustrated with Putin and frustrated with Russia's failure to change course. And then, though, you see, I think, a week ago, people were saying, well, has now Trump made the pivot to a strong anti-Putin stance? And that lasted all of about 8 days. So I'm not sure what we're going to see coming out of this meeting next week. I would note, though, that even in meetings that I would argue Trump did not seem to get much, his tendency is to portray it always as some great success. And so I expect that there will be that portrayal, but the question is going to be, at the end of the day, did he achieve some things from the Russians that would actually have a chance of bringing this horrible war, which is now 3.5 years since the major invasion, but a war which actually began in 2014, bring it towards a just and durable peace? And those are the kind of particulars that I think people should look at when they're trying to decide how successful this meeting was, or how successful this meeting will be.